And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage, where two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, we keep needing to hit the reset button to get another chance to conquer D&D.
Hi, I'm Ange, and I have been gaming for over 3 decades. Started with 1st edition, and I haven't stopped yet. I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a decade now, and I run the Gnomecast, the Stew's podcast.
She's Ange. I'm just Jared. You can find my content on Gnome Stew and whatdoiknowjr.com, and eventually there may be something new there.
After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we're going to be talking about boss battles. Then we're going to have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
The Lost City, a 1982 Dungeons & Dragons adventure, introduced the entity known as Zargon. Zargon's description harkens back to pulp mythos stories from the 30s, and an ancient, unique monster living under a lost society is almost like something Robert E. Howard would have put in a Conan story. The adventurer names Zargon the story's villain, blaming him for destroying the titular Lost City and providing his stats. But it doesn't directly lead to him. Instead, it advises using information about Zargon to craft a higher-level adventure where player characters are ready to fight him. Now, the 2014 Player's Handbook offers Zargon as an example of a Great Old One Warlock patron. You know, if you wish to channel your inner Zargon without going to the lost city of Cynidicea. But I do hear it's quite lovely this time of year. All of the madness blooms in spring.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
So, since we last recorded, I have gotten to play and run. I'm going to let Jared talk about his game that I played in. But the other game I got to play in is not D&D. In one of my Saturday groups, we decided to play a one-shot since we finished up the Poison Kingdom, but we didn't want to restart the City of Cowls and then have to wait a month to play because a couple of us are going to be heading to a weekend convention gathering thing on the day that we normally would have played. So rather than, start and miss and all that, this past Saturday when we played, Chris offered to run Printweaver. It's definitely a fantasy game, and the gimmick of the game is that characters are built around your fingerprints. Loops, whirls, and arches all determine your stats and gear.
Interesting.
In the week leading up to the game, we all got our fingerprints in various ways. One guy took really close-up pictures of his fingers and played with the contrast. A bunch of us happened to get together for another gaming thing, so we all had like a little print pad and we're like taking our fingerprints like we were getting arrested or something and putting them on the character sheets and then examining them to figure out how many whirls, how many arches, so on and so forth. And then we all sent them to Chris, who basically made our characters for us. I was Clementine Butterbark, a tough fighter with a big lion animal companion. I had 7 strength, 0 will, and 3 dex. So very strong, moderately agile, and absolutely no magic. Apparently, arches, the feature of the fingerprints that add to will, are actually pretty rare because I think in the group we only had one person had 3 arches, and that was the highest. I was definitely the highest in strength with my loops. I think it was the loops that added to that. Either way, the dice mechanic of the game is a D10. I don't remember the specifics of the system. I do remember we had a really good time. It was a fun scenario where we had to go rescue a shrine that's the home of one of the high powerful weavers. There's so many video game tropes in this game. I haven't done a corpse run since I played EverQuest in the early 2000s, but that's a whole conceit in this game, because if you are a character that is powerful enough to have your fingerprints be powerful, when you die, you get resurrected, but you don't have your stuff on you. So you need to go to your body and get your stuff. And if you don't do it soon enough, your body can rise up on its own and start becoming a problem. One of the things we had to fight was my corpse. and there was a whole bunch of other things that were just very video game influenced, and like we're like, oh, that's from Final Fantasy. Oh, that's from EverQuest. Oh, this one's from World of Warcraft. So many video game tropes. It was a lot of fun. I don't know what kind of longevity the game has, because your fingerprints are your fingerprints. You're not gonna really get a different combination to play a different character in another game. So
would you say you can't quite put your finger on that game?
No, Jared, I'm not a dad with dad jokes. I also got to run Tales of the Valiant. They had solved the problems in Lavoca by defeating the Hollow Man and destroying the Singing Tree, which got them all to 2nd level. And I started the session with them getting back to Zobek and getting their payment from Lorelia, the seer that had kind of given them the mission. And she told them, I don't have anything for you yet, but please stay in touch, and I'll let you know if the forest has need of you again. They all kind of went off to do their own thing, and I got to play a little bit with the downtime rules in A Life Well Lived, which is by Cubicle 7. I had provided the players with a list of the options of downtime, and when they asked about certain options, I shared details of those, just so they could have an idea of what the specifics were. Because a couple of them are like things meant for higher level characters or more established. Like there's one that Turvin's player was interested in, but it requires you have a base with a herb garden and stuff. They're 2nd level characters. They do not have these things. So I ended up going around the table with each player and asking them what they were doing in this week off, and then have them do their rolls to see if they succeeded. Grish ended up doing pest control, which I had be some merchants in the merchant district having a problem with rats, because there was this little supernatural underdark critter that was getting into stuff and getting the grain all over the floor and drawing in the rats. Grish's player rolled so well, they made 96 gold and earned 2 healing potions. Which is absolutely extraordinary at that level. But I'm like, okay then. Dahlia wanted to master a spell, which basically gives a spellcaster the ability to cast the spell once per long rest without spending a spell slot. It only lasts until your next downtime, but it's a pretty cool advantage. And Dahlia, as a ranger, just got their spells, was super excited about this. Turvin and Zartath wanted to do Arcane Adjustment, which changes a spell slightly and then gives it to them. This is permanent. This doesn't reset. It gives them as a spell they do not have to memorize. It's like an always available spell. They still have to spend a spell slot to cast it. And then Malvern, the rogue, wanted to do a heist to steal a magic item to make him more durable. I probably should have said no to this one, but I'm like, what the hell? It's just a cloak of protection. It's a +1. Malvern rolled well enough to get it. I can also pull in some enemies that are like, you don't know if that place was warded. You don't know if they know what happened. The only character I didn't have do a thing, and some of the players started picking up this, was Nevrim. Nevrim is the warlock who is tied to a fiendish patron that he does not want to be part of. He had suggested one of the downtime activities he could do someday would be rock bottom. But I'm like, I don't leave your fine china on the shelf. If you have a cool story idea, don't wait until the perfect time. Like, pull it in. Yeah, there's something to be said for building up to things, but it's also makes sense for Nevrim to be having this problem now, because he knows that as soon as he gains a little bit more power, i.e. hits 3rd level, his pact with his patron becomes permanent, because that's when everything is sealed in place. Technically, he doesn't have a patron yet. I don't know. Warlocks are weird.
Yeah, the 3rd level warlock thing kind of throws off some of the story of the class, but...
Yeah. I mean, he's got the contract. He's indebted to a fiendish patron, but he doesn't want to be bound to her, and so on and so forth. So he basically went on a bender and got himself trashed in a dive bar. So I skipped Nevrim, and I had Dahlia get a dream message from Lorelia the Seer saying, hey, one of you is going to be offered a job soon. I don't know what it is, but I just know that one of you is going to be offered a job soon, and it's going to lead you on a mission where you will come in contact with something the forest needs help with. Oh, and by the way, Nevrim could use some help. She's worried about him. And then ended the dream. Of course, Dahlia ended up misinterpreting this whole thing. But either way, she ended up gathering the rest of the party and going off and finding Nevrim in this dive bar where he was absolutely trashed. And he was saying, she wants me to do bad things. Where Dahlia's going, well, maybe we need to do those bad things. I was told to take the first job we're offered. And I'm just like, oh, that's not it. And then he's like, I don't want to listen to her anymore. And Dahlia's like, oh, but she's worried about you. Zartath's player is a really smart guy. And he's like, that's not the she Lorelli is talking about. Lorelli is talking about the forest. You know, so they ended up dealing with that. And then the very next day, somebody showed up at Grish and Malvern's door to offer them a job. And now they're off in the woods, headed off on this mission where it will lead them to the next thing the forest needs solved. It was actually a really fun session, and I have to confess, I did the downtime rules wrong. Because the way it works is you have a DC, and the character needs to make 3 rolls. It also mentioned a target number, and I'm like, I don't know what this target number is. So we're just going to ignore it for a moment. And then after the session was done, I messaged Jared and go, what's the target number? What does that mean? And so I found out, oh, okay, what it means is the target number is the number they need to reach over the DC they're rolling to succeed at the task. So the whole idea is that for the week, they have the opportunity to make 3 rolls towards this activity and getting the goal of the activity. If they succeed at all 3 rolls, great, they don't lose any progress, but if their rolls are not high enough over the DC, they don't succeed at what they want to, but they don't lose any progress. So the next time they have a week off, they can continue with it. I think going back through the rolls, only Turvin wouldn't have gotten his downtime activity reward. I kind of lost track of a couple of the rolls because the chat doesn't go back far enough, but I'm pretty sure Dahlia, I know Grish rolled well enough because 96 gold and 2 healing potions. But Dahlia, I think, rolled well enough, and Zartath rolled well enough, but Turvin did not. So we're gonna work with that. I'm not gonna take the spell away from him, but we'll figure out some ways to make it work narratively and stick to the rules.
I really like those downtime rules. They are so much more flavorful and varied than the stuff they have in the DMG or Xanathars.
I loved pest control because it's basically like you take on a job dealing with a bunch of pests. Whether or not you succeed, you still earn the admiration and thanks of the people in the area you're trying to do the job. And if you do succeed, you earn 1d4 gold per success over the DC. And if you're 5 or more over the DC, you gain somebody gives you a healing potion. I'm like, that's really cool. That's a really cool thing no matter what level you're at. The heist was pretty cool, although I can see turning the heist into a bit more of a group activity and have it be something bigger. But I'm like, let's just roll with this. We're playing with these rules and see where they go.
Yeah, like I said, I really like them. We played with them a little bit before we had our big long break, so I really like them. So I managed to create a fiasco in concert with Roll20 for my Midgard game. So I still like to use random encounters, and if you'd like to hear some philosophy on that, we did an episode on it, so you can go back and listen to it. You could do it right now. We'll stop. You can come back. Okay, now that you're back. So...
No, we won't stop. They're going to pause.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mainly, I think part of what really reinforced that I kind of like using them is in my Curse of Strahd game. When I have my players roll, there is so much tension. Every time I have them go from one player to the other, rolling for their encounters to see, and they are terrified that something is going to find them in Barovia. I put together some encounters for the road as my group in Midgard is traveling, and I put them together by theme. one of the themes that I had was cult. I pulled way too many characters into this encounter. I don't know what happened because I was using an encounter builder and somehow I managed to get double the amount of the budget that I was supposed to use for that encounter in that encounter, and I should have noticed that. I should have noticed that before I even started the encounter, but for some reason it did not click. I'd like to think that I just have so much faith in all of you that you would have been able to handle it.
Well, the issue we ran into is Xena does all psychic damage, and she ran up and stabbed somebody, and it did nothing.
4 out of 4 creatures were immune to psychic. 1 out of 4 was immune to fire. 3 out of 4, if you hit them with psychic, do an area attack that reflects the psychic damage out to other people. I am not against using things that the players are good at so that, you know, they are challenged by trying to work around what their usual strategies are. There is a difference between not being afraid to use something like that and having an entire encounter where everything does not react to 2 of your players and a third one also can't help as much. But as we get into this encounter and I realize that, wait a minute, this doesn't look right, I also realized that I really thought I had told everybody to level up to 12th level before we took our 3-month break at the end of last year. And apparently I didn't. So I'm looking at this encounter going, this looks bad, and also I didn't tell them to level up. So I was like, okay, everybody, let's just stop and level up. We'll pause this, and we'll come back. At which point, we find out that our sorcerer's sheet will not let her level up. It is trying to restart her at first level every time she hits the level up.
Ivy's character sheet has been broken since the beginning.
Yeah, we have a hard time dragging and dropping things to it. It tried to do this the last time we leveled up. I fixed it, quote unquote, by exporting her character to my characters and then importing it back in the campaign and letting her, and then assigning it to her. That apparently worked for 1 level and then it broke again. So I spent about a half hour rebuilding her from scratch on a different character sheet so that, if there is something wrong with that character sheet, then this should be fine. If there's still something wrong with this character sheet, then Ivy as a concept is cursed. But by the time I was done rebuilding that, I'm just looking at this encounter and going, this is not right. I'm not going to redo the math, but this is not right. So I told everyone, and then you wake up. I know that's really cheap. There is a part of me that wants to be a little defensive and say, because this is a weird mythos, aberrations that they ran into, they did have that dream. That's not a joke that, and now you wake up. At some point, there is something else in the campaign that may remind them that they had a dream that these things could be out there.
It is okay as a GM to admit you made a mistake.
Yes.
And retcon that mistake.
I made a mistake.
It happens to the best of us. I don't know. We might have been fine with the encounter once were those things, were they immune to non-magical damage?
1 was, the other 3 were
resistant. So it would have been hard. I don't know how many hit points they had. They might have taken us out. This also is why the fight with the Sahagin and the devil sharks was so hard, because we were also supposed to be 12th level for that one. Yeah.
Now in that case, I didn't blow my budget on that one. I just budgeted it for 12th level characters, not 11th level characters.
Yeah.
That might have been maybe an extra devil shark.
But ultimately, it's okay to admit you made a mistake and be like, we're just going to wipe the slate clean and start over again. It's better than when I was 17 or 18 and we spent all afternoon making characters. The GM grabbed a module and we died on the doorstep because we made 2nd level characters and he grabbed an 8th level dungeon. He's like, oh, well, you guys are dead. Let's make new characters. No.
I also got to run my Curse of Strahd game, which I did not throw something horribly over-leveled at them. I didn't throw it at them. It might be in the module. They are currently in the Amber Temple. we had 3 out of 6 players. And what happened was, first, we knew we were going to have 5 out of 6 players. Then during the week leading up to it, we knew we were going to have 4 out of 6 players. The day of, we found out we had 3 out of 6. So I was kind of mentally keeping track of, okay, I may need to pull some things out here. I may need to make sure there's a little bit more breathing room here. I need to trust myself not to murder my players like I almost did on Thursday night. So one of the things that was funny is they were concerned that they did a speed run through the dungeon by using the specter that the sorcerer has as a familiar to scout through rooms. And they're like, one of these times we really need to actually like go through one of these dungeons and not just have him scout everything. Well, it turns out I am using the Curse of Strahd companion from the DM's Guild, and they have a bunch of things to kind of expand the adventure. And one of the things that I took from the companion is they can't leave the Amber Temple until they do something specific.
Ooh.
So they think that they did the speed run on the thing, and then they tried to leave, and they can't.
I was going to say, you could also have something kind of like trap the spectral companion, so they oh no, it's not coming back. What do we do?
There is going to be at least some point in time when something will see it, because it's naturally invisible, but something is going to be able to see invisible, and it's going to kill Billy. And then they won't have Billy for a while. But it's okay, because he's a specter and he comes back. One of the things that they ran into a group of barbarians who also like sheltered in there and warned them, we can't leave. So then they went through this big long thing of trying to figure out if they can leave, and they couldn't. So they decided to try and figure out what's wrong. They went back to the Arcanoloth that the cleric gave her soul to, which still floors me that was her first move with that Arcanoloth. And they go to the Arcanoloth and they're like, did you know that we wouldn't be able to leave? And he was like, yeah. They're like, how does this help if you have our soul and we're supposed to be helping you leave Barovia if you don't tell us that we can leave the temple? And he was like, well, if you manage to get out of the temple and escape, then I escape Barovia. If you all die, I got an extra soul really easily. There's no downside for me.
Don't give your soul up so easy.
This is when they learn Arcanoloths are jerks, guys. But he told them they need permission to leave. They have to find someone with authority to give them permission to leave. Since it's Barovia, anyone that works for Strahd could give them permission to leave, which is not going to be like an easy thing to do. Or if they find the old high priest of the temple, who is currently a lich. They started kind of exploring the rest of the place. They accidentally ran into a golem in the hallway, and I was kind of generous about whether the golem interpreted them as going into an area that it was guarding or not. And when they finally pushed it a little bit too far, I had them all make athletics checks to run away from it. So it was actually kind of a neat scene, because they were running from this golem and then slamming doors shut in front of it so that it doesn't come through after them. They also talked to like a ghast who used to be a teacher at the temple, who still thought they were students. And his quasit, that is his familiar, is like chittering at him in Abyssal, trying to explain to him that these aren't students, these are living things, and, wake up. And he was already mad at the quasit because it was, criticizing his lesson plan that he was planning. That's when they found out a little bit more about the lich and how the lich sometimes remembers that it's a lich and sometimes doesn't remember that it's a lich. So maybe if you catch him in a good mood, you'll get permission to leave. Before we wrapped up, they did fight a pack of Vargulis. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, but they're the things that are like the withered heads that have bat wings on the side of their heads. And if they kiss you, your head starts to rot away and you turn into one of them.
Ew. No, thank you.
Yeah, I love these, though. I've loved them since they were in the Monster Manual too. But they have almost always been a glass cannon. Like, it is terrible if they do what they're supposed to do, but if you hit them, they pop. So they were all excited. They hated the description of them. They were like, no, those things can't continue to exist. And they got into a fight with them. They killed 6 of them, and they were so excited they kept texting the other people in the group that weren't there, like, we took out 6 monsters without the rest of you. And I'm like, they each had like 15 hit points, but that's okay. After they had that encounter, they were like, if we're either going to try and negotiate with the witches that work for Strahd or the lich, we don't want to make that decision and lock the other 3 people into that decision that aren't here right now. So let's stop right here and we'll pick up from here. So that's where our Curse of Strahd game ended.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
While action-adventure stories have often involved a singular enemy culminating in a final challenge for the protagonist, the thing that really cemented the concept of the boss monster and popularized the term itself was video games. After tromping through various other levels and locations and fighting tons of minions, you would get to the next stage of the game, get the magic item you needed, or win the game, after you beat that one single monster. We wanted to look at boss monsters in D&D and how you can use them in your games. Is there anything else that we should say about the concept of boss monsters before we dive into this any further?
I think it is important to note that there can be a distinction between a campaign's big bad and the boss monster. The big bad can, be some Machiavellian lich in a tower who has minions doing their bidding and all of this. The boss monster is, could be that lich, but could also just be some gigantic, monstrous thing that you have to fight, before facing the lich. It usually has a little bit more of a connotation of being, it is a singular, terrifying, big monster. It's the dragon in Dungeons and Dragons.
The only other thing I would contribute to that too is that boss monster kind of comes from the idea that the story of a lot of these video games was that thing that you were fighting at the end was what was in charge of everything else in there. So in Castlevania, when you fight Dracula, it was Dracula's castle. So therefore he is the boss, ergo boss monster.
I think the connotation has kind of come to be the big fight against a singular creature.
Yeah.
Whereas the big bad of most D&D campaigns is gonna involve a lot more minions and a lot more obstacles before you face down that person or creature.
Yeah, and like you said, you could end up in the course of, say, playing through Storm King's Thunder, get into a fight with a dragon that is not the boss monster of the entire adventure.
Mm-hmm.
But as you're going through its lair and fighting all of its minions and dealing with all of its traps, it's kind of the boss monster for that segment of the campaign.
Yeah.
So what is it that can make boss monsters hard to run well?
It is really hard to effectively run a singular monster against a party of players.
It sure is.
It really, really is hard to do this well. Because if you have a monster that is tough enough to stand up for a few rounds against all 4 to 6 players wailing on it with everything they've got, it's probably going to wipe those characters out with one hit. And that is a really, really hard thing to manage. Even when I ran the kids game and they went up against the dragon from the Dragon of Icespire Peak, they had it dead in a round and a half. And these are teens that had no concept of tactics whatsoever. It's just they threw everything they had at it, and the hit points weren't enough to keep it alive long enough to be that much of a threat. They were super happy they killed it that quickly, but it's really hard to run an effective, truly exciting boss monster battle in D&D.
It is. And I remember, and we'll talk about some of the tools, in 5e specifically, but I remember there were a couple times in like the Pathfinder Adventure Paths where it was like, oh, here's the big culmination of everything that you've been doing, and they're going to go fight this thing. And I missed everything on the first round of combat, and by the end of the second round of combat, that horrible, terrible, scary monster had literally done absolutely nothing.
Yep.
There's another concept that kind of orbits the boss monster, and that is sub-bosses or mini-bosses. What do we know about those?
They tend to be larger obstacles on, if we're talking pure video game logic, they are tough, singular bosses you face on the way to the final boss in the dungeon. It's the guardian of a doorway, the ogre in charge of the goblin minions. You know, it's a tough fight, but it's not the big bad at the end of the whole thing.
I think the thing about the mini bosses is there's something that feels significant. Like, this is a bad thing that works for the main villain, and they are memorable. They have their own gravitas to them. For example, like if you look in Metroid, Mother Brain is the primary villain in that, but Ridley and Kraid are both these legendary creatures that you're fighting in 2 other sections.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't just like, oh, it's a little bit tougher than other monsters. It's like Ridley and Kraid, you're hearing about these 2 other monsters that are in charge of these other sections of the space station that you're going through. So it's really built up there.
Yeah, if you take this out of the dungeon and just think of this in a broader story-based scope, these are the lieutenants of the general that's the big boss at the end of things. Whether they're actually answering to that big boss or they're just taking advantage of the chaos that big boss is causing, they are still like tough in their own right, but they're not the be-all end-all of the threat.
Yeah. My example that I would give is not a good example because the movie didn't really use them that well, but when you look at Thanos and the Black Order, which were all of the, you know, the important people that worked for him, they weren't all the little minion people that were running along the, you know, the path in Wakanda getting blown up left and right. They were those intimidating singular characters that somehow still didn't have one-on-one fights, so it kind of ruins this concept, but they should have been that.
Yeah, I think they ran out of... I don't know that I'd say they ran out of time, because I find Endgame and Infinity War and Endgame to be really good pieces of entertainment, but I do think they could have been better mini-bosses along the way.
And to be fair, I can't remember his name now. The one that controlled like gravity planes that showed up in New York. He got a lot more screen time, and he did get some one-on-one fighting time with Iron Man and Spider-Man and all those characters. So
I don't remember their
But that's
names.
what we're talking about when we're talking about mini bosses. So, what are some of the tropes that get attached to boss monsters?
They are the all-powerful being at the end of the story. They are terrifying. They are huge. You need to figure out how to fight them before you face them. Also, this is not my final form.
You know, and it's so funny because I remember that so much as a kid, like playing Castlevania, when you finally get Dracula's health meter all the way down and you're like, I finally beat him. And then all of a sudden he starts flashing and you're like, oh crap. And then he turns into this giant bat-looking demon thing that you have to now fight that again.
Yes.
The other thing that I have always thought was funny, and I have had people mention this, when I have run published adventures that happen to use this trope back to back, and that is the load-bearing boss. And if you've never heard the term load-bearing boss, that is the final creature that you defeat, and then for whatever reason, now you have to run out of its lair because everything is collapsing.
I've had that happen before. That was the end of the Ladies of Fazdale campaign. Actually, we didn't technically defeat the Lich. We found his phylactery and destroyed it as we were fighting him. And destroying his phylactery allowed all 3 demon lords that he had promised his soul to appear and start fighting over his soul. At which point the tower started collapsing. And we had to basically explain how we were getting out of that tower alive. My character, Z, she surfed the sacrificial table out of the collapsing building. I got a natural crit. I got a natural 20 on my roll for acrobatics to say how well she did. The GM was certain that somebody was going to die in that fight, but we all made it out really, really well.
What's funny is when I was catching crap from my players about the load-bearing boss thing happening more than once, is that was when I was running Dungeon Crawl Classics, and I was running published adventures, so just keep in mind, DCC has a few load-bearing bosses in some of their adventures. I don't think it was quite as serious in there because some of them are a little bit more tongue-in-cheek that, you know, you kind of expect over-the-top big things to happen in them. But I will say, sometimes it is appropriate to have this kind of, last minute, everything is falling apart, moment where their entire headquarters collapses. But yeah, keep in mind, if you've done it a couple times, don't do it too many times in a row.
Yeah, like any trope, you don't want to abuse it because then it's just going to get old and expected. And it is a really fun concept to have and to give your players the excitement of having to make these rolls to get out of there and maybe pulling each other out of pits as things are collapsing behind you and all of this stuff. But don't abuse it because it's the same as like putting their loved ones in danger.
Yeah.
Don't abuse it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would caution, because this is another load-bearing boss issue that happened, is in one of the Paizo adventure paths, there's a mansion, and there are several items of treasure in that mansion, including something like an adamantine longsword that you may need later on to fight a golem in another adventure. And my players found the shortcut to the main villain, and being a load-bearing boss, they kill him in that area. The mansion falls off the cliff. They never get any of the treasure that was in the mansion because they shortcut straight to him.
Yeah, you gotta be flexible.
Yes. If I were not being as much as a jerk as I was at that point in time, I would have looked at it and said, maybe I need to put this adamantine longsword somewhere else. But
yeah,
there is a slight bit of me that every time in this adventure, in this campaign, they kept intentionally trying to find those shortcuts. And there was part of me that was like, maybe there should be consequences.
I might have done you watch as the mansion falls off the cliff. You see several glistening chests fall into the rubble at the bottom of the cliff in the surf, and then make them try and go down there and get it.
That looks like our treasure.
And then they have to fight Sahagin and demon sharks.
So why would we want to put a boss monster in our D&D games?
'Cause that's what you do. I mean, like I said, it's the name of the game is Dungeons and Dragons. We want to have those big fights. This is expected. It's a trope of the game. That's what we expect out of storytelling, is the big epic fight against the big nasty boss monster.
Yeah, I mean, I can wax way too poetic about this, but there is that sort of symbolic feeling that in a game or in an action story, your problem can be personified by a thing that can be defeated, and that's what that boss monster represents. So we talked about putting boss monsters into our games. Why would you want to have those mini bosses in there?
Speed bumps? Depending upon what you are doing with the boss monster, with that big bad at the end of the story arc or end of the dungeon, you want to make that feel like they earned getting to it. And sometimes that can mean taking out the lieutenants and the sub-bosses that lead up to the big boss. My players that are pretty tactically minded would be like, yeah, we're going to fight them first because we don't want them showing up when we face the big boss. So there can be things to be said about taking out the big boss's support network before you get to them.
Yeah, and I also think, one, like, if you know this is going to be a long-term campaign villain, it does give the players a sense of accomplishment without having to shortcut straight to the boss.
Yeah.
Once you have taken out this lieutenant that has been doing horrible things across the countryside, you can say, well, I know we still need to get rid of X, but for now, we can rest easy knowing this creature is no longer going to eat people in these towns anymore.
In the City of Cowls game, we knew that the Ebon Cowl was not necessarily a boss monster, but we knew that the Ebon Cowl was in charge of a lot of the things that were going on in the city that we were dealing with. The way the GM structured the campaign is we were picking off his lieutenants as we got closer and closer to figuring out who the Ebon Cowl was.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really exciting way to structure the campaign. And now we're dealing with the actual boss monsters, frickin' Asmodeus, the king of hell. And we're not there yet. We're close.
Pretty big boss monster when you know, all things considered.
Pretty big boss monster.
The other thing I would say about mini bosses is if your mini bosses are badass enough, it boosts the reputation of your big bad. For example, using Star Wars, the fact that Palpatine had Vader working for him tells you something about Palpatine.
Yeah, and if you don't have those tough lieutenants leading up to the boss, when they get to the boss, if you haven't carefully crafted it to be a truly tough encounter in D&D, when the players wipe the floor with him in under 2 rounds, it's going to feel really anticlimactic. Whereas if you have made them earn getting to the boss by getting through his, support network, even if they do wipe him out in, 2 rounds, it'll feel like, oh, we got here and we got him really good.
To use a movie that we probably have not used as an example here, in The Wizard of Oz, when they go through everything that they have had to go through, like they're dealing with the poppy fields, they have the flying monkeys, they have the Wicked Witch, they're dealing with all of this stuff. When they finally get to the wizard and it's like, you're just a dude behind a curtain, that's fine, because they have had this big epic adventure to get to that point.
Yeah. Speaking of Wizard of Oz, I just got to watch Wicked, but that's a completely side tangent we don't need to go down.
I need to watch that yet, though. Do you always need to fight the boss monster to beat them?
I don't think so. I think sometimes you can, depending on how the boss monster is set up, it could be something as such as there's a ritual to banish them back to where they came from. And all you have to do is complete this ritual, which is going to be the big fight along the way. There's a video game I don't want to spoil, but the boss at the end of it, you can defeat her by having done all of the things to appeal to her lost sense of empathy and caring.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do this the right way, there's no fight at the end. You just basically convince her that what she's been doing is wrong and against what she truly believes in. So, hey, babe, why don't you stop? Like I said, I'm not going to name the game, but it can be both satisfying and disappointing when you get there and realize you've saved up all of your resources for a really big fight, and then it's just like, she's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right, we're done now.
I mean, to some extent, we already mentioned Vader and Palpatine.
Yeah.
And Luke didn't need to fight Palpatine.
Nope.
He needed to redeem his father.
Yep.
So there was an example of the big bad felt like a big bad, but also the point wasn't fighting him.
I will say, if you are going to do that, if you are going to have that option, make sure your players know that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you weren't expecting that to be an option, but your players start talking about it, maybe lean into it.
Yeah.
Because there's been times where I've been expecting something to just be a knockdown, drag-out fight, and the players come up with something clever and interesting that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I'm not going to force them into the fight, because if they succeed at doing this clever other thing, let them have it.
I was just going to say, like, another example from my misspent youth. In G.I. Joe, when they capture Cobra Commander, I don't know if you know this, Cobra Commander isn't really that much of a physical threat on his own in most media. But it was very meaningful to capture him, and to get to him, they had to go through Storm Shadow. However, I think this is another good point we should probably bring up, and that is, if your boss monster isn't necessarily going to fight, you can still have a situation where you are doing some kind of chase or skill challenge or something in order to finally capture them. So it isn't that you have an anticlimactic fight where they just walk in there and bonk them on the head. They are still having to use some of their resources, some of their abilities in order to finally bring them down. What do you think is really important to make those boss fights and the boss monsters themselves feel meaningful?
It should really lead up to them.
Mm-hmm.
It should be that this boss monster has been causing other issues. The Dragon of Icespire Peak. The dragon has been causing havoc throughout the region. So the way the adventure is set up is you're supposed to seed in these moments where they have a close call with the dragon, or the dragon attacked the town, or these other things, which are not necessarily directly dealing with the dragon itself, but are reaffirming the fact that this dragon is a problem.
Yeah.
As a result, when they finally get to the dragon and fight it, it feels important.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, is you want to make the boss fight feel important.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that I have seen in a lot of D&D adventures, especially in older editions, where there's probably something in charge of all of these things, but the adventure almost wants it to be a mystery what the thing is that you end up encountering. And it wants it to be a mystery because it's like, oh, surprise, did you get the right spells, or do you have the right magic items? But sometimes that can undercut how nasty that last thing feels because it hasn't really had a presence. There is a boss of some sort.
Right.
But when literally there's like an aboleth leading this army of mutated, humanoids that used to be normal and now they have mucus for skin. I love aboleths. Anyway. But when you foreshadow that, the players are thinking about that weird twisted aboleth all the time, right up until they finally run into them. Lord of the Rings, another good example. You hear about Sauron all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, they never are directly in the presence of Sauron, but his presence is in that entire story.
Yeah, there's a boss you defeat without fighting it.
Yeah.
Without facing it. You just have to destroy the thing that its power is tied to.
And the Nazgul are good examples of your mini bosses there too.
Yeah. I am no man.
God, I love that scene. Anyway. This actually ties into something else that I had heard somebody point out. And, Star Wars is probably one of the most overanalyzed piece of media in every form. But one of the things they point out is the best Star Wars stories are the ones where you know who the villain is. And granted, in a Star Wars story, you can have scenes where someone is talking to Grand Moff Tarkin and he never encounters the players. But there is that feeling like, you don't just hate the Empire, you hate Grand Moff Tarkin. And actually, Rebels did a pretty good job of doing what we were talking about, making Tarkin more of a presence to the characters, because he's the one issuing all these edicts that are making the political situation on Lothal get worse and worse all the time. So his name is on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
What tools do we already have in D&D without doing anything special to facilitate boss monsters?
Legendary actions, lair actions. These two things in combination can make that boss monster, a little extra special as far as the fight goes. Legendary actions are a huge pain in the butt when you're a player and you're like, okay, I think we got him. And oh, wait, he can do that special stuff again. Urgh, curses.
All three of us can hit him before he goes next. Oh, no, wait.
Yeah. There goes our fighter. And the lair actions, we talked about this. We just had our episode on lair actions. I don't think lair actions should help the boss fight the PCs, but it should keep the PCs on their toes by changing the environment and doing other dramatic things. Both of those things can help make the boss fight interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're fighting a red dragon in a volcano and there's some kind of lair action that is like setting you on fire, I mean, that's not the dragon setting you on fire, but you are fighting in a volcano, so you got to kind of expect you might be a little flammable while you're in here.
I don't like being flammable.
Yeah. Mythic Odysseys of Theros, the one magic tie-in setting, introduced mythic monsters. I really like that, and that is literally the D&D version of you have taken them down to 0 hit points, they start flashing, and they turn into something else. Because the way mythic actions work, if you have not seen that book, is there is a section that says when this monster reaches 0 hit points, they gain however many hit points. It's usually a little bit less than they had originally, but they gain this many hit points, and now instead of using their legendary actions, they have 3 mythic actions, which are similar to the legendary actions, but worse.
I said. You thought this was my final form.
And I really like that mechanic. I'm glad it worked in there. They put it on a few other things. I think like in the Fizzban's Treasury of Dragons might have had a couple monsters with this. They haven't done it a lot though, and it doesn't show up in the 2025 monster manual either. But I really like that as a tool. And basically the way that works too is they say you get twice the amount of XP because you're essentially fighting that thing twice.
Mm-hmm. That would make sense.
Yeah.
Not that I track XP because I knew milestones, but still, it's a really cool idea to make that boss fight a little more exciting.
And depending on the mythic monster, it's not just that they get those mythic actions. There are times when how you describe them will change. Like it's not just they stand back up and now they're hitting you harder. It is that thing like, okay, now we kill Dracula. Oh wait, now he's a giant bat demon. So what about if we look outside of what already exists? What can we bend and poke into places and repurpose from other parts of D&D, maybe even to emulate some things that, say, video games do in order to make these boss fights a little bit more dynamic?
I'm going to say one word, bloodied.
Yes.
They really, really should have taken Bloodied from 4th edition and put it into 5th edition and 5.2024, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Because Bloodied is a really brilliant concept where the monster you're fighting, once you get it to 50% of its hit points, something changes.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily the, you think you have it beat and all of a sudden it rises up in a new form. No, this is suddenly it's fighting tougher because it knows that things, it's more resistant. It's got more hit. I don't know that more hit points would work, but it's suddenly got a different attack. It gets more exciting, and it really helps hammer home the idea of making these monsters able to last in a fight without wiping the floor with the player characters.
Yeah, that was one of the things the 4th edition dragons, I shouldn't say all because I can't swear that I looked at every single one of them, but most of the ones that I saw, when you get them bloodied, they got to use their breath weapon. And that was expressly because it was like, this is a dragon. It should be able to use its breath weapon.
Yeah.
So you should have to deal with that before you kill it. So as soon as it hits bloodied, it, as a reaction, gets to use its breath weapon.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've seen in some products that it's kind of neat is giving something temporary hit points until a certain thing happens. And that kind of goes along with something else that I was going to bring up, but I want to talk about the temporary hit points first because it's what I like about that is even if they keep getting, let's say they get 50 temporary hit points, and that seems like a good amount, but when you get to higher levels, not as much.
Yeah, I mean, a rogue could take out those 50 hit points in one shot.
So if you never stop the thing that keeps giving the boss monster those temporary hit points, and your players do, say, 65 or 70 points of damage, the boss monster isn't dying that much faster, but its hit points are going down. Those temporary hit points are just a buffer that are giving it a few more rounds to actually do something.
I've also heard of, your mileage may vary on this, and I know there's people who will be like, oh, you can't do that. This is D&D. We don't do that here. But don't track the monster's hit points for the first 2 rounds. Do the effects and all that the players are putting on it, but don't track the hit points for a certain amount of time, and then if they've been successful so far, now it's bloodied, and they've got to get through the half of the hit points. That way you get 2 rounds out of the monster.
That is a thing that I know, like I kind of pushed back a little bit when you mentioned that a couple episodes ago when we talked about it, but for a boss monster, I don't feel as strongly against that.
Yeah.
That does feel like a decent situation where you can say, like, no, for a couple rounds, this thing just doesn't feel it.
You want to be careful in that you don't want to feel like you're screwing over your players.
Mm-hmm.
But you still want to make the fight feel like it's an actual threat and like it's something important.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very fine balancing line to walk.
The other thing I was going to say is there was, in 4th edition, there were a lot of encounters that were built with, like, dynamic traps. so that while you're fighting this boss monster, there's also like these blades swinging around the room. And the only thing that I would say about that is you have to have a good reason for those things not to affect your boss monster. So you're not just saying, no, they're immune to magical guillotines. That's fine. They have that very specific defense. But if you, again, going back to the red dragon, if the red dragon has, traps that shoot jets of flame, then that is something else that is causing them damage that the dragon doesn't have to worry about.
Yeah.
And the reason I mention that as traps is that means that somebody in the encounter has to actively deal with them, or else you're just going to keep taking that damage. So everyone is not hammering your boss at one time.
Right. And
the other thing, and I'm reminded of this, I won't mention the game in case you're still playing it, that Ange and I have recently talked about. There is a game that I just finished, that she finished before me, where one of the bosses cannot be hurt until you do something. Like, you have to do things in four corners of this room before you can even hurt them. And that is honestly something I would import into a boss fight in D&D. Like, you have to do these things. It is literally invincible until you do these things.
Yeah.
But you also should not make the thing they need to do too hard to do.
Yes.
It should probably just be they need to go to a part of the map and maybe make a skill check that isn't super hard to shut it down. Because you really don't want to do this to squash them. You want to do this to give more gravitas to your boss monster.
Yes. Yes.
Give them a few rounds to throw lightning bolts at you when the PCs can't do anything back to it. So, do you have any other last-minute thoughts on boss monsters?
Do it! Throw a kaiju at your players.
That's a great example of something you would have to do X to make it vulnerable to even take damage, too.
Yeah. I mean, John Arcadian wrote a whole thing on the Trask. That's a boss monster if there ever is one.
It definitely is. Honestly, the main thing about boss monsters that really gets me is people sometimes get really uptight about pulling video game tropes into D&D, and the funny thing about it is D&D made some of these tropes. They go to video games. It's okay if they come back to D&D again.
And I mean, don't worry about steal concepts and ideas from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a person who plays a ton of different video games, but when I get obsessed about one, I play the heck out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love thinking about how to use certain tropes from a video game in a role-playing game, and vice versa. Because things don't translate 100% all the time. You can't take everything you see in Baldur's Gate 3 and plop it in a tabletop game, but there is some stuff you can take from that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not for D&D, but as soon as I finished playing the Spider-Man, the Sony Spider-Man game, I wrote a bunch of things for Marvel Multiverse that you could do to emulate that fight with Doc Ock at the end, where you can't stand in one place or it electrocutes you and you have to wait for it to discharge, and then you have to hope you can jump to the middle tower and beat him up again. It's like, I loved that, but yeah, it's like, how do I do this in tabletop? So yeah, it's just something to think about.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Well, moving into downtime research, every episode we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, our listeners. It might be podcasts, websites, videos, podcasts. Did I say that twice? Whatever.
Could it be podcasts?
It might be podcasts. I like podcasts. It will always be something we think will enhance your D&D experience. First, though, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon, so if you'd like to help support us doing this show and let us provide some additional content for you, we'd love it if you joined. We have our own Discord, and we release supplementary material pretty frequently. There's just a whole bunch of stuff up there. It's worth checking out. It's patreon.com/Thac0WA.
There might even be something up by the time you listen to this that Chris formatted really well and makes my words look even, better because he did some neat formatting with it.
Graphic design is cool like that. So for me this week, you may be familiar with Ginny D, who does a variety of D&D related videos. Recently, she's been putting her cosplay skills to use and making some D&D related Barbies. She has a barbarian and a paladin she's done so far, and they are amazing. Shortly after she shared the video about the paladin, she released a paladin subclass called the Oath of Glam, designed for Barbie-themed paladins. It is absolutely delightful. The Oath of Glam has the tenets of be yourself, let's go party, dream big, and style is power. It may seem like a joke, but it actually looks pretty playable. I really like it. We'll have a link to her YouTube short where she shares that, and the newsletter you can sign up for to get access to the subclass. It's so very pink.
I remember watching when she made her Tasha cosplay back when that book came out. And this reminded me a lot of that. It sounds funny, but just the idea of what she's looking for in order to make something look right on the character that you don't quite get. How is that going to look until she puts it on there? It's really fun watching those. Yeah. So I briefly mentioned last time around that Dimension 20 had a new game coming up. It's going to be called Titan's Takedown, and we now know that it is going to premiere April 2nd, and it is going to be for 4 episodes. Brennan Lee Mulligan is going to be running the game, and the players are going to include Xavier Woods, Bailey, Kofi Kingston, and Chelsea Green. Hannah Rose, who is one of the founders of Wild Made Press and does the quarterly magazine Horizons, led the team that did some of the design work for this game, and friend of the show, Brandon Stoddard, is one of the people that were on that team. If those names don't sound familiar to you, those are all professional wrestlers. If you are wondering why these professional wrestlers, the only thing I can tell you is, once Xavier Woods came out during a match when his partners were in a tag team. So he's not in this match. He walks out with a trombone. Someone asks him, why do you have that trombone? And his response was, I'm the bard. I love Xavier Woods, and he is such a geek, and it is great. I'm looking forward to seeing this. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
The Gnomecast. Several gnomes from Gnome Stew get together and talk about gaming topics and themselves in an effort to entertain you and to avoid being thrown in the stew.
Is there like a single host for that that's usually on with a rotating cast around her?
No. It's just a collection of gnomes.
We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.
Yay!